I've set up 10 different cameras across the spectrum, from the iPhone through the DV cameras. We've got a GoPro, the Canon DSLRs, Sony mirrorless cameras. We've got the Sony F55, the Alexa Mini, and the Red Dragon. To give you the most thorough, comprehensive, full-on, practical, premier, downright dope camera test.
Watch out for the devil, watch out for the bad man, watch out for the fingerlings fucking with your magic. Don't watch out for me though, I promise I'm your friend. I won't eat you, I love you, I just wanna hug you. Girl, I love you so much. Jump motherfucker, jump motherfucker, jump. Never meant to hurt your jump motherfucker, jump motherfucker, jump. You have the most beautiful smile.
In this month's episode of Creator Camera Hacks, ever made on YouTube or anywhere else ever, because that's how we do it here. So if you're into learning new shit, pretty pictures and good stories, then click the subscribe button below. I'm Dan Mace, your collaborator and internet friend. So let's dive into everything camera. Cameras are everywhere. There's one facing you while you watch this, unless you cover it up like me. If you're on your laptop, there's one. Your phone, there's two. One you never use on your tablet, but it's there. They're on street corners, shop ceilings, office walls, doorbells, dashboards, and bumpers. I think it's safe to say more video content is being captured and shared at a rate we can't even conceive, now more than ever. And most of the cameras we have the ability to control, we know little to nothing about, so we just switch them on auto and shoot away, hoping for the right moment that's going to captivate an audience. Or you're a filmmaker that's learning the ropes and just can't seem to crack it the way you'd like to. And I'm going to share everything there is to know about camera, along with many useful hacks to turn you from so-so to pro within 10 minutes. Dope track, eh? I don't mean to boast, but my collaborator and good friend Jason and I made it. And where can you get these tracks that I've made in my previous films, like Seeing Sounds? I'm glad you asked. On the Epidemic Sound Library, that's where. So click on the link below to sign up and create your Epidemic Sound account today to make sure that you're ready for when we drop the albums on there. And not just that, Epidemic Sound is a sponsor of these Creator Hacks videos, as they want to empower creators through education, which is the same thing that I want to do. So that's why they're a collaborator and sponsor of mine. So big ups to them and thank you for the support, but more on that later. Let's talk cameras. Firstly, a camera doesn't actually work like an eyeball does. There are many significant differences, where the only similarities between the eye and this incredible invention are that they both use lenses to focus the light and have sensors to capture it. Photograph, in Greek, photo meaning light and graph meaning to capture. But both have completely different ways of processing the image for immediate viewing through what's known as photoreceptors. In short, you don't actually see with your eyes, rather your very active brain. That's filling in a lot of gaps and has the unfortunate habit of being eluded in low light and with what's known as blind spots. And therefore, I would argue that a camera is a much more reliable source of capturing what's actually there, what's happening in front of you. But then you would actually still need your eyeball to see that, so it gets very confusing, and we'll speak about that another time. A camera is basically a light-proof box built to capture light. The diaphragm of the camera determines the amount of light that's let in. In the front of this are lenses. Light bends when it travels through different spaces, through different mediums, such as from air to glass. The light is then focused to a central point. When you click the shutter button, the movable mirror shifts upward in the camera. The light stops when it reaches the film in the camera, which forms an inverted singular image, and a video camera basically does this 24 times a second, the same speed a human eyeball processes light. That's the stripped-down version of how a basic 16mm camera works. But the world of video cameras has evolved beyond our imagination in the past 20 years. And we can now do so much more than the human eye ever could. There are so many different capabilities that money can buy you, but expensive cameras don't buy you skill or finding nuance within your frame or basically being able to capture a creative shot. Therefore, I've added in many hacks within this video to get you there with the cheaper cameras too. I have 10 different cameras here, from the extremely basic mobile camera, the whole way up to the most high-end cinema cameras, to showcase the similarities. We're first going to cover the fundamentals, and then we're going to get into the action of it. Firstly, we're going to look at exposure, then lighting, then framing, and last, but so far from least, camera movement. The three keys to exposure are your ISO, which is the sensitivity of the camera's sensor, aperture, which is the variable opening by which light enters the camera, and shutter speed, which is the nominal time for which a shutter is open at any given setting. Achieving the correct exposure is a lot like collecting rain in a bucket. While the rate of the rainfall is uncontrollable, three factors remain under your control: the bucket's width, the duration you leave it in the rain, and the quantity of rain you want to collect. You just need to ensure you don't collect too little, which will be underexposed, but that you also don't collect too much, overexposed. There are many combinations of how you expose your image. You just need to understand the look you are trying to achieve. First, start by keeping your ISO reasonably low. This will reduce the amount of noise on your image. The shutter speed or shutter angle should be double your frame rate to be safe. And then let's look at your aperture, which controls how much light you let into your camera. The more light, the lower the number known as your f-stop. The lower this number, the shallower your depth of field, meaning that less is in focus. This is great for portrait shots. This makes things look far more cinematic. To achieve this look on the cheap when you have too much light to go shallow, you can make use of stockings to shoot through. This also helps with the softness of your image, as well as if you want to take things further, attach a piece of glass to the front of your lens to apply Vaseline to it, leaving a small hole. This gives you a split diopter feel. Then while we are talking about ways to affect your image to make it more cinematic, create a warm glow with a few matchsticks, as well as you can upcycle your sandwich bag to create a soft glow around your image, as well as if you have access to haze or a smoke machine, this will create great fractures of light. All these techniques can be used on all cameras as demonstrated later. Then the larger your f-stop number refers to a deeper depth of field. This is what you want to do when shooting landscapes and big wides, to rather get more in focus. Make sure when shooting fast action, you up your shutter speed for a sharper image. Then lastly, change your ISO accordingly, but generally don't push this higher than 1600 if you can. Even if you're shooting on a camera like a Sony that prides itself on low light, it's not a good habit to get into, because when you move on to bigger cameras, as you drift higher than 1000 ISO, you'll start to notice the noise. It's super important you understand all these three keys before you start bending the rules to affect your image. I really enjoy shooting with a lower shutter for intense running shots where you feel the tension and the lag on screen, etc. It really all comes down to light and using the light. Firstly, if you want a magic looking feel to your image, you should shoot in what's known as magic hour. This is in either dusk or dawn. Look at this clip I took of Gabby walking 2 years ago on an iPhone 8 camera. This natural look of shaky cell phone footage does the shot more justice than trying to affect it perfectly with smooth camera movement and then grading it, because it would lose its authenticity. I'm going to be doing a creators hacks class on lighting entirely, so I'm just going to touch on the knowledge you didn't yet know you needed within the lighting sphere. Okay, understanding the bloody confusing histogram. A histogram is a graph showing the distribution of light in an image. Most cameras are capable of displaying a histogram for each image stored on the camera's memory card. Look in your camera's settings to see if you can display your histogram before shooting a shot. Your image is made up of millions of pixels, and every pixel has a value representing its color. The pixel's brightness is derived from this value. A histogram shows you the number of pixels of each brightness in your image. The scale along the bottom of the histogram goes from left to right, from 0% brightness, which is black or underexposed, to 100% brightness, which is white. The taller the peak, the more pixels of that brightness are in the image. Lens flares. When used correctly, lens flares definitely make your image more cinematic. If you're looking for J.J. Abrams type lens flares that run horizontally through your frame, you're gonna have to fork out a lot of money to rent or purchase what's known as anamorphic lenses. Please do not try any hacks here with your spherical lenses to try and get some sort of horizontal flare. It just looks terrible. Rather make use of your spherical lens and shoot during dawn or dusk to get real flares coming into your lens. In my opinion, unless you're shooting an action scene or fighting scene or car commercial, normal spherical flares look just as good. If you don't have the luxury of great light, you can make use of a torch or a CD, as well as a few crystals to give your frame very interesting vignetting. Shooting high speed means more light. If your camera has the ability to shoot 60 frames per second, 120 or higher, make sure you have sufficient light. Remember that opening up your lens to a low f-stop is dangerous because there's more time for your audience to see what was not sharp in your image when playing back at a high frame rate at 24 FPS, 120 frames being 5 times slower than normal. Now we're going to look at the power of good framing. A quick recap from film school: we've got the close-up, medium, and wide shot. High angle to disempower the subject, low angle to empower the subject. Eye level to speak directly to the audience or to achieve a neutral feel. OTS meaning over the shoulder of a cast member to look at your subject, and POV means point of view, like in a shooter game. Panning refers to moving the camera left or right horizontally, and tilting meaning to move it up or down vertically. Dutch tilt means to shoot diagonally. Then tracking in to add tension, tracking out to decrease tension, and then merging a zoom with a tracking shot. You can zoom in and track out, or zoom out and track in. This achieves what's known as a Hitchcock zoom, and this is done to add an extreme amount of tension, as seen in this famous shot in Jaws. Handheld refers to shooting, holding the camera in your hand, and locked off refers to locking it off on a tripod. If you don't have a tripod, here's a quick hack with 2 small bags of lentils added to a pouch. This creates great support for your camera, especially when you're doing things like time lapses. Lock it off. For me, there's nothing better than the correct use of handheld accompanied by a locked off frame. This is how I shoot most of my films. Next, we're going to talk about shot listing. It is super important to shot list before going out and actually shooting, even if it's a small self-funded film or film for YouTube, and then obviously a high-scale production. Always shot list. And if you don't know what a shot list is, this is a list where you will describe the framing. Here are the things to consider before writing your shot list. Size. The size of your subject has a direct relationship to the importance of that subject. Relationships. When we see more than one character in a shot, we are meant to acknowledge their relationship. Balance. A balanced frame includes elements on the left and the right hand side of frame. The god of framing is the director Wes Anderson. Each frame is so well considered, aesthetic and balanced. Based on how you plan to position your subjects, you'll need to adjust your camera work. Capture all your framing details on a shot list well before you arrive on set. That way you have a clear idea for the scene and can communicate your vision with ease. That's not to say things may not change the day of the shoot. You'll always have to be prepared to switch things up, but always consider what you're doing and how it will communicate to your audience. Don't get caught in the trap of shooting something a certain way just because it looks pretty. Then lastly, the 180-degree rule. The 180-degree rule sets an imaginary axis, or eye line, between 2 characters or between a character and an object. By keeping the camera on one side of this imaginary axis, the characters maintain the same left to right relationship to each other, keeping the space of the scene orderly and easy to follow. Once you understand the fundamentals of good framing, you can move on to camera movement. Don't just start tracking for the sake of it, or my worst is use your friend's stabilizer just because he has one. Like I said before, in my opinion, a well-considered locked-off shot tells a far better story than a pointlessly moving cinematic fluid shot. However, there is something really special about camera movement to reduce or to add tension, as well as when you're shooting tabletop, fashion, or music videos. If your friend doesn't have a stabilizer and you really want to add movement, here are some cheap ways to do so. To rent a wheelchair from a prop house, super cheap and very effective. Like I said, I avoid perfection with my cinematography, so doing long track shots like this works better for me. You can make use of a towel or carpet too. This will give you really smooth movements. And then lastly, if you want to shoot an object rotate, you can use 2 pieces of wood, the one with a nail in it like this, and then just spin it. If you have the ability to use motion control, go for it, as this offer won't come around often. I have shot with these mainly for interesting pack shots on TV commercials. When it comes to movement, there are loads of ways you can be creative. Just take a look at the Instagram page, Shitty Rigs, to see how creative filmmakers get. I love it. And also, if you're on Instagram, go follow me there. I'll pop a link below. Then, as promised earlier, more on my friends and collaborators at Epidemic Sound. You've heard me say this 100 times and I'll say it again. When it comes to sound and music for your videos, there's literally nowhere better to go than to the Epidemic Sound and Music Library. I'm not just saying that because they support my journey as a filmmaker, but I'm saying that because before I found Epidemic Sound, I would spend days just looking for a singular track that's perfect for a video. And when it comes to sound, I would just rip low quality sounds off of YouTube and there'll be no filing. It's just a big mess. And now all I have to do is schedule in an hour to source all sound and music for post-production. As Epidemic Sound is just that user-friendly, and their library of great tunes is just so extensive that I don't think I've heard the same track twice. Furthermore, they offer their stems as downloadable for you to create your own unique track progression. Other than that, don't forget, you're awesome, brew, and I'll see you next week.